Now that we've talked about the 4 rules of gun safety, I'd like to talk a little bit about gun handling. Now, there is a great deal to learn about properly handling a firearm, and it has to do with whether you're handling a rifle, a shotgun, or a pistol. Today I'm going to focus just on a pistol. The first thing you need to know is if you're going to carry a pistol, you need to be able to safely draw that weapon without discharging it accidentally. Now, in this case, I'm carrying on the hip. The strong side hip carry is what it's called. But in other cases, people will carry it in the front of their waistband in a holster, not without a holster. But that's called the appendix carry, and there's advantages and disadvantages to both. I prefer the hip carry. So if you're going to draw your weapon, you need to do so in a very logical, repeatable way each time. And the way that I do that is the first thing you have to do is learn that placement of the hand onto the butt of the weapon. You have to get a good solid grip on your gun. Don't reach back and finger your gun out of your holster. You want your hand, your palm pressed tightly against the firearm. You draw the firearm, and when you draw the firearm, it turns to the front as soon as it comes out of the holster. So you oftentimes see people, they'll draw their firearm and they'll sweep their gun up like this. Now, that's not an effective way to draw your pistol. For one thing, you can discharge your firearm into the ground and cause all kinds of problems. So when you draw it, you reach, you place the hand firmly, you come out, and the muzzle turns towards the target. Now, this hand, the second hand, comes to the first hand as you press forward. Now, the reason for this is if I'm coming forward and perhaps the target is engaging me, coming upon me quickly, I can fire as I push the weapon out and hit the target. All right? So, again, to draw the weapon, you reach, you get a firm placement, the pistol comes out, turns to the front, comes to the front of the body, and presses forward. Now, there are many different types of stances. There's Weaver, modified Weaver, isosceles. You have to find the particular stance that you like, and that really all determines on whether these arms are bent, one arm's bent, both arms bent. That's a very personal choice. All right, many people now tend to prefer the feet about shoulder width apart, both arms extended nearly straight, and then they engage their target, and that tends to work well for many people. Longer distance shooters, the ones that are trying to get better, actually tend to have one arm bent and one arm straight. Again, that's a personal choice. What I want to talk about for right now, though, is just getting the weapon out, presenting it, and firing the weapon. So again, you reach, get a good grip, comes out, presses forward, engage the target. Okay? Very straightforward. Beyond simply drawing and presenting your weapon being ready to fire, what else is important? Well, learning where to hit the human bodies to get the maximum effect. And there's a few regions that are particularly important. The first is called the thoracic cavity. And it's basically this region right up in here, from the neck down into this region here. If you put bullets in this area here, you very quickly will stop a person, and it's a very effective place to shoot, much more effective than, let's say, the abdomen region, where a person might well continue to fight on, or worse, they might suffer terribly, and it's not something you want to just drop your target and stop it very quickly. The thoracic cavity is a great area to do that. The second one, of course, is what's called the ocular window, which is the region right here. It's basically from the eyebrows down through the bridge of the nose. All right. Now, if you penetrate one of the eyes, you'll generally go through the brain and stop the person quickly. If you penetrate the soft cartilage of the nose, you have the same effect. The mouth does not give you that, nor does the top of the head necessarily give you that, where the bullet might deflect off. So the ocular window is what it's called. And then finally, you have the groin. And the time that the groin is particularly important is if a person might be wearing body armor, a headshot might be particularly difficult, or he may have a helmet of some sort on, so you can shoot for the groin. So those 3 areas are particularly useful targets. The first, the groin, the second, the thoracic cavity, and the third, the ocular window. If you're going to discharge your weapon in a self-defense situation, you are willing to kill that person, these are the targets that you would shoot for. All right, well, with the basic drawing and firing out of the way, let's talk about a couple of special cases. One of them is that if a person is very close. Now, if you think about the standard drawing where you're presenting the weapon and you're pushing out and firing, you might not be able to do that if the person's only 2 or 3 feet from you. In fact, he might actually take your weapon away from you. So there are many other techniques by which you can fire. One that I found particularly effective, however, is to engage the target with your non-firing hand, perhaps striking, giving the person just enough of an impulse that he sets back as you draw your weapon. So you strike while you're reaching for your weapon, you pull. Now your hand can't, you don't want to shoot your hand, so you retract and fire. All right? So it goes something like this. The target is up close, you're in a life or death struggle, you strike and fire. All right? Now, there is a tendency to shoot low. All right? What you'll find is that when you do this, if you practice it, the muzzle may point low and you'll end up gut shooting the person. So you want to, many times what you'll see is you'll see people talk about leaning back a little bit as they fire this. Now what I found to be particularly effective in training is to strike, draw, and do what's called the zipper shot, which is boom, 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 boom. You shoot up the person, let's say 4 shots as the muzzle rises with each shot. So the first bullet might hit in the groin, the second in the gut, the third in the thoracic cavity, and maybe the fourth in the ocular window. You still have to maintain control of your weapon, but it does give you a very quick way to deploy several shots into a person that's up close. One other skill that might be useful when you're trying to defend yourself from an armed attacker, let's say, is if the person is moving, many people find it very difficult to hit the target. So there's a couple of techniques for this. The first is, if you're running while you're shooting, it's almost certain that you're not going to hit anything you intend to hit. All right? Understand that right away. If you're going to discharge your weapon, you need to be as stable and as still as you can be. All right? So shooting while running is something only for video games. It's not something most people can do successfully. So that's the first thing. You want to be still and stable. But the target may still be moving, and they may be running and firing as he's doing this. So you have a couple of choices. One is called tracking, and one is called trapping. All right, tracking is just like it sounds. The person's moving, I'm going to track him and attempt to shoot him. All right? So the person's moving, I'm going to track along and fire when I have a good shot picture. That works well for some people. Other people find that trapping works well. Now by trapping, that means that I'm going to wait for the person to cross my line of sight. So the person may be moving from left to right, I'm going to draw, place it, and when he crosses, I'm going to fire the weapon to hit him as he crosses through my shot pattern. All right, so tracking and trapping. You have to practice both of those to find out which works best for you. Some people are able to track targets, some people are always behind the target and can't seem to hit it, so they end up the trapping works a little better for them. Alright, the next topic I'd like to talk about is how you handle failure to fire malfunctions. Now there are many possible causes for failure to fires, but I'll talk about a general process that you can use to recover your weapon and put it back, get yourself back in the fight. So to do this, I'll start with an empty firearm. Again, I visually inspect it. Now I know it's ready for training. I need some form of dummy round. Now in this case, I'm going to use what are called snap caps, which are just dummy rounds. They pose no threat to anything around us. They won't discharge. So I'll load that into the weapon. And then I always personally visually inspect that indeed that bullet did go into the chamber as I wanted it to. The reason I do that is that I've found many times, especially when under pressure, and I'm guilty of this as well, what happens is when you first insert the magazine, you may not fully slap it in. And even though you think you've put a bullet in the chamber, you may not have. You go to engage the target and you get nothing. All right? So this is a double, when I do this and I double check it, I know I'm ready to fire. All right, so let's say I'm doing a training class, or maybe I'm actually engaged in some self-defense situation. I draw my weapon, I've engaged my target, and what happens? I get a click. Well, that's not a good sound, especially when you're in a real situation. So you need to have a routine that you follow, that you don't have to think about, that can get you back in the fight, make your weapon ready to fire. And it's really a 3-step process. You tilt the weapon, you slap the magazine, and you slide the slide. All right? Tilt the weapon, slap the magazine, slide the slide. So it'll look like this. All right? Now, if you can hear the dummy round fly off across the room, what that does is that clears perhaps a bad round out of the gun. I'm ready to re-engage and like such. All right, now, there are times when you end up with maybe a double feed, and doing that technique will not, in fact, clear the weapon. It's not as common. 90% of the time this will clear the weapon, but on occasion it won't, and you'll try and slide the slide and it will just double feed 2 rounds and you really got to miss. That technique will not clear that. So what you have to do when you have a double feed like that, so let's say you've tried to clear the weapon, you can see you have a double feed, you have a mess on your hands, you need to eject the magazine. All right, so you don't end up trying to feed any more rounds in. Now normally you'd eject it onto the ground and you'd use a spare magazine, but in this case I'll just eject it into my hand. Now the bullets are perhaps jammed here in the chamber. You'd like to clear them. The way you do that, eject the magazine, slide the slide 3 times with the gun tipped, where the bullets will try and either be ejected out or fall out onto the ground, like so. All right. Now once you've done that, you've cleared the weapon. So the weapon is clear. There is no bullet in the weapon. You take either your second magazine, you recover your first magazine, reinsert, and re-engage. All right? Those 2 techniques of clearing weapons that have had some failure to fire work very well in practical situations, and I encourage you to practice them.